Hello, and welcome to the Curator's Corner. Here at the Curator's Corner, we aim to bring you the history of firefighting in Philadelphia, as well as the history of the Philadelphia Fire Department and its volunteer partners. On this episode of the Curator's Corner, we're going to learn about the fatal Barson Overbook restaurant and delicatessen fire that took place in the Bell's Corner Shopping Center on Boston Ave and killed 4 Philadelphia firefighters members on May 16, 1976. I'm your host, firefighter Brian Anderson, curator of Fireman's Hall Museum. Joining me today is Chief Greg Masi of Philadelphia Second Alarmers. Chief Masi will be giving us his candid view of what happened on that day of the Barson's restaurant fire and how it affected the department and the city. Chief, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Brian.
Just give us some context on this event. On Sunday, May 16th, 1976, box 1656 at Boston Ave and Castor Ave was struck for a fire in Barson's Overbook restaurant delicatessen. As companies searched the smoke-charged building, the heavy terrazzo floor suddenly collapsed, sending PFD members David Stewart, 53 years old, a 29-year veteran of Ladder 20, Bernard McSloy, 32 years old, 12-year veteran of Ladder 28, and Ulysses Welch, 49-year-old, 25-year veteran of Ladder 28, and Richard Ironcone, 29 years old, 8-year veteran of Ladder 34, into the basement. Chief, first tell us a little bit about yourself and your role on that day.
So, Brian, at that time, I was actually a member of the Philadelphia Fire Department Reserve Fire Force. People probably don't remember, but at one time, the fire department, because of the lack of personnel during the World War II generation, every city started an auxiliary firefighting force. Philadelphia hence started the Reserve Fire Force. I was a member at the time when this occurred, and our role as a member of the Reserve Fire Force, on any 2-alarm fire or greater, we would respond to the actual scene itself to assist the fire department in setting up equipment and et cetera. So on that day, I remember, as you said, it was a Sunday afternoon. When the initial report came in, it was evident they had some time trying to find out where the fire was located. Remember, the place was open for business. It was a delicatessen restaurant. People were actually having, I guess, breakfast or lunch at that time. But when they entered the property, there was, of course, smoke shelling. Not a lot at that time, but they just had a hard time finding the source of the fire. And apparently over time, they discovered this was a basement fire. And the fire was burning probably for longer than maybe the owners of the establishment knew, because when they turned in the alarm, by the time that the department arrived, and they arrived quickly, this fire had gained some headway in the basement. And subsequently, what happened was, after the investigation was done, apparently this fire charred a lot of the support beams that were holding up this heavy floor. And of course, the floor gave way while the firemen were inside doing an interior firefight at that time. When I arrived, it was well after the second alarm. And believe it or not, I mean, there's a lot of twists to this incident, but the chief that was the incident commander was Battalion 12, who was Harry Walsh, who I believe went on to become a board of directors at Fireman's Hall.
That's correct.
And I didn't know Chief Walsh at the time, but I do remember that day as the event unfolded throughout the day. He was visibly shaken because, when I arrived at the point the collapse had already occurred, the first floor had collapsed, and there was a very, very frantic effort to try to get to the members that were in the basement. I think the floor kind of collapsed into what they call a V-shaped, and it kind of actually slid into the basement, basically. And I remember throughout time, you would talk to some firemen that were still around and made that incident. The toll could have been much worse, because there was actual reports that there were some firemen in the first floor when the floor gave way. believe it or not, there was a cigarette machine, I think, near the front entrance, and one of the firemen grabbed onto this machine. Otherwise, he probably would have slid it as well. So it was really a very sad, because you knew that the outcome was not going to be good as time progressed. And I remember when we were there, of course, the floor had collapsed, but now the fire was kind of free burning, and they're doing their best effort to get to these members. And then eventually, on the rooftop of this delicatessen, there was a lot of air conditioning equipment. It was very heavy, and the roof gave way, and all this equipment that was on the roof came down onto the first floor. So that made it a really Herculean task to get to these members, and with all this equipment coming down. So I do remember at one point, I don't remember seeing them arrive, but I do at one point, at the time, Mayor Rizzo arrives, and of course his brother was the fire commissioner, Joe Rizzo. They eventually brought in a crane, and the crane basically was helping extract a lot of this heavy equipment out of the first floor area that had fell down from the roof to try to get to the members. And then Brian, and just this, this took a period of time. The fire came in, if I recall, it was right around lunchtime, noontime. Right. Probably a couple hours later, it went under control. But I know it was later that evening, probably like well after dinner time, where they got the last member out of the building. It was a very long process, to get all 4 members out of the building.
So we're talking about 1976, where we didn't have the technology and the different advantages that we have today. Who was aiding in the rescue of these members that were trapped in the building at that time?
So, Brian, my memory is not that vivid, but I remember there was there's a lot of photographs that have probably captured the scene, but there were so many firefighters that were involved in the process. I don't believe, and I guess I could be wrong, I don't believe we had like a rescue one or squad companies at that time, but there was a lot of firemen that were involved, and it was a very very dangerous situation, because they realized that there was a major collapse of the structure itself, and then they were very taking their time, but working as quick as they could to get the members. But there was a lot of members involved in this incident. But I said, once the crane arrived and they started to extract some of this, and they kept the fire at bay from spreading to the rest of the shopping center, because the Barson's building was actually right near the end of the shopping center. There was a store next to it, but they wanted to make sure they could keep that fire in check. But in the meantime, keep the rescue efforts up as best as possible. But we knew it as time went on, it was going to be more of a recovery at this point, and a very, very sad and somber scene. I do remember there was a mention that the day work platoon that was on this scene, as it was getting later in the evening, I guess at the time they're concerned about bringing in relief and worrying about, we have to relieve these people so they're not getting, past their ending time. And of course, there's always concern about, overtime and budget. But I remember at the time they said that the mayor said, don't worry about it. Let everybody stay here. They all wanted to be involved in this operation until they can recover, everybody from the scene itself.
Now, at this time, how long had you been with the Fire Reserve?
So I joined the Fire Reserves in 1973. And so we're talking 76. So it's 3 years, I was in there. I was actually at the rank of lieutenant. So, and basically our job was, at the point, was just really to help, companies stretching additional water lines. So when I arrived there, the second alarm was already sounded, and they wound up requesting 2 more alarms. So we were quite busy at that time, just getting in lines and protection in the event that the fire started to advance, further down the shopping center. So as I said, once we got our operation completed, then we went back to the scene, and basically we became part of, the rest of the firemen, just hoping for the best, that they would get to these members. But it was pretty evident, I said, because of the scene. And I said, you look back, and I at some point there was a light rain to start to fall, on the scene, and that kind of like, when the rain started to fall and then the smoke started hanging low to the ground, it was a pretty somber scene. And again, I do remember the mayor coming. The mayor must have came from a function. He was dressed, I think, in a suit or something like that. I remember that. And he came, and I remember he was, conversing with his brother, who was the commissioner at the time. And again, we just keep in mind, we realize now that we had just probably lost 4 firefighters, and we're suffering. There's the whole department suffering because from the year before, we lost 8 firefighters in the Gulf refinery.
Right.
So here is less than a year. In less than a year, we have 12 Philadelphia firefighters that perished. That was a real somber moment for the entire department and all the members. And I do remember just as the Gulf firefighter, when the funerals were held, the thousands that attended was the same way for the Barson's fire. There was, believe they were down at the cathedral. At least a few of them, maybe 2 or 3 were at the cathedral, and the thousands of firefighters that came across the country, because it was a very newsworthy event, what occurred. We just lost 4 firefighters, on a Sunday afternoon. And it was just a real tragedy, for everybody involved. And just a shame.
Now, with the time that you had on it and getting notified when you have second alarms or greater, you build a rapport with a lot of these members and they become friends. And did you know anybody that was personally trapped in the basement at that time, or
no?
How did it affect your mindset on the fire ground?
No, Brian, I didn't know anybody because at the time I just got involved in the fire reserves, and in '73. And of course, as people don't realize how busy the department was in the '70s and '80s, so I was responding to a lot of what we call extra alarm fires at the time, which would require a lot of manpower and resources to be summoned to the scene. So I really didn't know any of them, but I think you and I had talked, and there's a couple twists to this event that I didn't realize until years later. That one of the firefighters, Aloysius Welsh, was kind of related to my family. So my sister, her daughter eventually wound up marrying Aloysius Welsh's son, whose name is Greg, same as my name. And I didn't know it at the time, but Greg was he's still with the Philadelphia Police Department. He's in the crime scene unit. And one day we were going back to the original, keep in mind, this event happened in 1976, but the department in 2009 recognized all 4 of these fallen heroes by having a plaque dedication. And when I was at the plaque dedications with second alarmers, and at this time now I'm in the second alarmers, and our job is to provide hospitality to all of the people that would be attending. So when I'm at the plaque dedication in 2009, the families are starting to arrive for the dedication, and I happen to see my sister's daughter walking with a young fella, and I says, "So her name is Amy." I goes, "Amy, who's this?" She says, "Oh, this is my husband, Greg." And I goes, "Greg," and his name was Welsh, but I never connected it over these years when they got married, because he never really talked about his father dying in the fire. And that's how we got that connection. Greg and I, of course, we talked about the incident, and he was very, very young, very, very young at the time. He was just born. And but that was one of the twists that I had with this particular incident at the plaque dedications in 2009. And another ironic twist, I think I told you this, Brian. So the plaque dedications took place in 2009, and I believe it was maybe May or June when they occurred. And the Barson Overbook delicatessen, of course, it never reopened again. They did rebuild it, but it was never a delicatessen. It actually became a 99-cent store, or a dollar store, whatever you want to refer it to as. And that structure stood there for years. Well, at the day of the plaque dedication, a lot of the firefighters that were retired, they were all talking, reminisce about the incident. And they say, "Yeah, that's where it was at. It's now a dollar store." Yeah, and you wouldn't know there was a fire there. The shopping center was completely redone over, the whole new facade. 3 weeks later, literally 3 weeks later, after the dedications of the plaques were done, they struck a box for Bustleton and Bergen. Would you not believe that the fire was in this dollar store and was very similar? The fire was in the basement. And this was it was a very warm day. They wound up pulling 2 alarms, but it was such a protracted event. The basement, again, wound up, the first floor, I should say, caved into the basement. there was a lot of product in the basement, a lot of stock. So the fire had a lot of spread and feed time. This fire went well into the evening. I remember them changing shifts in the evening. Another platoon came on, and this fire was still burning, just like it happened at that moment. It was a hard time getting to the seat of this fire, and it was the same location of Barson's, and same, exactly, almost very similar basement fire. I don't know if it was electrical in origin, as the Barson's was determined, but it just brought back a lot of memories. And again, and I haven't been there since, so I don't know if they rebuilt the dollar store or not. But it was exactly 3 weeks after our dedication. It was so ironic that this would occur, at the location of Barson's.
But when we talk about the incident commander, who was Battalion 12, who was Harry Welsh, who was an honorary member to the museum and then later became on the board of directors, with his mindset being in despair, I mean, was there anybody there to give him any assistance, any aid, and kind of focusing on the incident? I mean, that's a very chaotic, traumatic scene with brothers that that have, I remember over the years listening to some of the jobs or being on some of the jobs where we lost members, and it really does affect you. How would you say that Harry, Chief Welsh, was able to get through and still keep his focus on the mindset of trying to extinguish this incident and rescue these brothers?
So again, Brian, I didn't know Harry Walsh, but I realized as I was longer at the event, a lot of firemen and, of course, chief officers were comforting him. You could see he was very visibly shaken up by this. Of course, I believe he was the chief that requested the second alarm, because they realized this fire was starting to get out of control. And I believe the collapse occurred shortly after. But as the other alarms came in, the third and fourth alarm, other commanders started to arrive. And at this point, I mean, he was well within the attack, trying to, he was very upset. You could see he was upset. Didn't know who it was at the time. I can only see from the back of his running coat the name Walsh. And then it didn't, again, never knew him, never met him. It wasn't until he became involved with the museum where I got a chance to really meet with him. And believe it or not, I never even brought up the subject of Barson's. So I knew it was kind of tough for him. I mean, at the time, and you hear other firemen talking about very well-respected chief, and they said that was in his career, I think that was his first loss of life of a firefighter that, in all his years of his career. So it really hurt him well at what had occurred. And then I think when they had the plaque dedication, I believe it was one of the local papers, maybe the Northeast Times, whatever. They covered the event, and they basically were interviewing, people that were involved, family members. And they said that evening when Harry Walsh, the chief, did come home, he just visibly sat like totally in a rocking chair and was just like stunned. He just couldn't believe what happened under his watch, but you knew that day that it was affecting him because everybody was comforting him. There was all around him. Again, I didn't know him. As many fires as I was responded to in my, 2 or 3 years with the Fire Reserves, I never had a chance to really sit and talk with him or talk about his career. But that day, you knew that, it really was affecting him greatly. I mean, it affected everybody. I mean, the firemen, there was a lot of firemen there that you could see they were visibly taken just by tears in their eyes. Some were actually outward crying, who knew these members. Again, I didn't know any of the members at all, other than years later that, Ulysses Welsh's son would be involved in my family. But yeah, it was just a very somber scene, and goes back exactly to a year later when I was at the Gulf with the Reserve Fire Force. Same sort of scenario again. Firemen very, very visibly upset, realized that they lost a lot of members in this incident, and it just brought back so many memories. And I said it was just not even a year, basically, and we just lost 12 Philadelphia firefighters, in the performance of their duties. It was just it's something that's in your mind, Brian. I think, and when you look at a photograph, it kind of brings back more. But for me, I was really a youngster at the time, and I'm saying to myself, wow, how short can life be? And these firemen, and I believe one of the firemen, Brian, I think he was, I'm not sure who it was. One of them was detailed. I think he was detailed in he originally was from the ladder 20, but I think he was detailed into a company, whether it be ladder 34, that actually made the fire. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been there either. But again, and I think there was other firefighters that could have been hurt or possibly killed, because when the floor gave way, they said, I remember the story was there was a cigarette machine near the front of the entrance, and they actually grabbed onto the machine, which I think was either attached to the wall or bolt, and that saved them from sliding in. So again, it's so in a short period of time. I mean, this is, firefighters respond to these type of incidents all the time. Basement fires are dangerous, but this one here, unfortunately, because of this heavy floor that was installed, it gave way when the joist, I think they said, burnt through because of this fire that was probably free burning for a while, and that that caused the initial collapse of the first floor.
Wow. Well, obviously, when we have traumatic incidents like this, there's always some type of lesson to be taken away. And due to the technology and the nature of how we respond today, having the Rescue One and the squad companies with multiple members that are trained in trench rescue and various types of training really can help and aid an incident like that. But then again, with this job is dangerous. And sometimes, there are situations that occur that just can't be rectified.
No,
and sometimes these guys pay the ultimate.
Yep, I agree, Brian. And we should never, I think we should never forget. I mean, being involved in the second alarmers, and when the 40th anniversary came up, we kind of gave a lithographic print to each station, just to say, listen, we feel your loss as well. They should never be forgotten for what they've done. And just a reminder, and those plaques that are still at that location is a daily reminder to the residents that these are genuine heroes. They don't wear capes, that have a big S on the back. These are genuine heroes that do their job every day, and sometimes they're going into harm's way and they don't even know they're going into harm's way. And this was probably for them. They thought it'd be a typical type fire they can get to quickly, and unfortunately, it had a very, very tragic outcome. And again, being on a Sunday, I remember I just went to church that morning, and I know that day at the event there was clergy at the event just trying to give their condolences to everybody who was affected at the scene.
How long did you stay with the Fire Reserve? How long?
So, Brian, I actually lasted one more year till 1977. That's when because then I became a member of the Philadelphia Police Department, and I really did. I really missed being in the reserves because it was a busy period in Philadelphia's history, and responded to a lot of incidents. I met a lot of firefighters over the years who some went on to become officers in the department, and of course a couple went on to be commissioners. You didn't know at the time, but I had a lot of enjoyment being a volunteer with the Reserve Fire Force. There was not just there was other notable people. Chief Charlie Klink, who was a battalion chief, retired. He was a member of the reserves. Chief Bob Marcasello, he was a member of the Reserve Fire Force. It was kind of a gateway if you really wanted to be in the firefighting service. The Reserve Fire Force, which was all volunteer, and we had our own station and equipment. It was kind of giving you it was spoon feeding you. If this is what you really want to do, join the reserves and get a chance to see exactly what a fireman experience is. Of course, we were never involved in actual firefighting. I'll say interior firefighting. I mean, there were many occasions where their chief officer would allow us to man what they call, a deluge gun, but it was just gratifying for me that I had a chance in life to do this volunteer service, one on for the police department. And that's why I had to leave, because it was kind of tough for me working in the police department and being a member of the Fire Reserve, and did my 40-year stint with the city. But I got involved with the Philadelphia Second Alarmers in the 90s, and I'm still, a member with them today. So I'm still giving back my volunteer service. I still enjoy volunteering, but I look back then, it kind of molded. I think it molded my reputation. I just felt that, I wanted to help, and I got to learn from a lot of people, in the fire department. Met a lot of great people, and Harry Walsh, little did I know, I'd meet him years later at the Fire Museum, just a great individual. But I never brought up the Barson's fire to him. I just talked to him about other things in the department. He was a wealth of knowledge.
Well, Chief, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to thank you, my guest, for joining us today. I would also like to thank you for tuning in and watching. If you like some content that you're seeing here on this platform, please hit the like and subscribe button and leave a comment. Follow us on all our social media platforms. Also, check out Freedom from Fire, hosted by firefighter Camilla Bayete from the Philadelphia Fire Department's Fire Prevention and Code Division. So until next time, remember, 365, 24/7, fire is everyone's fight. Until next time.